Section 13 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 13. Oddly enough, she was one of the most thoroughgoing skeptics he had ever met, and possibly this was a theory he used to make up to account for her, so transparent in some ways, so inscrutable in others. Possibly she said to herself, "As we are a doomed race, chained to a sinking ship." Her favourite reading as a girl was Huxley and Tyndall, and they were fond of these nautical metaphors. As the whole thing is a bad joke, let us, at any rate, do our part, mitigate the sufferings of our fellow prisoners, Huxley again, decorate the dungeon with flowers and air cushions, be as decent as we possibly can. Those ruffians, the gods, shan't have it all their own way. Her notion being that the gods, who never lost a chance of hurting, thwarting, and spoiling human lives, were seriously put out if, all the same, you behaved like a lady. That phase came directly after Sylvia's death, that horrible affair. To see your own sister killed by a falling tree, all Justin Parry's fault, all his carelessness. Before your very eyes, a girl too on the verge of life, the most gifted of them, Clarissa always said, was enough to turn one bitter. Later she wasn't so positive, perhaps. She thought there were no gods, no one was to blame, and so she evolved this atheist's religion of doing good for the sake of goodness. And of course she enjoyed life immensely. It was her nature to enjoy, though goodness only knows she had her reserves. It was a mere sketch, he often felt, that even he, after all these years, could make of Clarissa. Anyhow, there was no bitterness in her, none of that sense of moral virtue which is so repulsive in good women. She enjoyed practically everything. If you walked with her in Hyde Park now, it was a bed of tulips, now a child in a perambulator, now some absurd little drama she made up on the spur of the moment. Very likely she would have talked to those lovers if she had thought them unhappy. She had a sense of comedy that was really exquisite, but she needed people, always people, to bring it out, with the inevitable result that she frittered her time away lunching, dining, giving these incessant parties of hers, talking nonsense, saying things she didn't mean, blunting the edge of her mind, losing her discrimination. There she would sit at the head of the table taking infinite pains with some old buffer who might be useful to Dalloway. They knew the most appalling bores in Europe. Or in came Elizabeth, and everything must give way to her. She was at a high school, at the inarticulate stage last time he was over, a round-eyed, pale-faced girl with nothing of her mother in her, a silent, stolid creature who took it all as a matter of course. Let her mother make a fuss of her, and then said, "May I go now?" Like a child of 4, going off, Clarissa explained, with that mixture of amusement and pride which Dalloway himself seemed to rouse in her, to play hockey. And now Elizabeth was out, presumably, thought him an old fogey, laughed at her mother's friends. Ah, well, so be it. The compensation of growing old, Peter Walsh thought, coming out of Regent's Park and holding his hat in hand, was simply this, that the passions remained as strong as ever, but one has gained, at last, the power which adds the supreme flavour to existence, the power of taking hold of experience, of turning it round slowly in the light. A terrible confession it was. He put his hat on again. But now, at the age of 53, one scarcely needed people any more. Life itself, every moment of it, every drop of it, here, this instant, now, in the sun, in Regent's Park, was enough. Too much, indeed. A whole lifetime was too short to bring out, now that one had acquired the power, the full flavour, to extract every ounce of pleasure, every shade of meaning, which both were so much more solid than they used to be, so much less personal. It was impossible that he should ever suffer again as Clarissa had made him suffer. For hours at a time, pray God that one might say these things without being overheard, for hours and days he never thought of Daisy. Could it be that he was in love with her then, remembering the misery, the torture, the extraordinary passion of those days? It was a different thing altogether, a much pleasanter thing. The truth being, of course, that now she was in love with him. And that, perhaps, was the reason why, when the ship actually sailed, he felt an extraordinary relief, wanted nothing so much as to be alone, was annoyed to find all her little attentions, cigars, notes, a rug for the voyage, in his cabin. Everyone, if they were honest, would say the same. One doesn't want people after 50. One doesn't want to go on telling women they are pretty. That's what most men of 50 would say, Peter Walsh thought, if they were honest. But then these astonishing accesses of emotion, bursting into tears this morning, what was all that about? What could Clarissa have thought of him? Thought him a fool, presumably, not for the first time. It was jealousy that was at the bottom of it. Jealousy which survives every other passion of mankind, Peter Walsh thought, holding his pocket-knife at arm's length. She had been meeting Major Ord, Daisy said in her last letter. Said it on purpose, he knew. Said it to make him jealous. He could see her wrinkling her forehead as she wrote, wondering what she could say to hurt him. And yet it made no difference. He was furious. All this bother of coming to England and seeing lawyers wasn't to marry her, but to prevent her from marrying anybody else. That was what tortured him. That was what came over him when he saw Clarissa so calm, so cold, so intent on her dress or whatever it was, realizing what she might have spared him, what she had reduced him to. A whimpering, snivelling old ass. But women, he thought, shutting his pocket-knife, don't know what passion is. They don't know the meaning of it to men. Clarissa was as cold as an icicle. There she would sit on the sofa by his side, let him take her hand, give him one kiss. Here, he was at the crossing. A sound interrupted him, a frail, quivering sound, a voice bubbling up without direction, vigour, beginning or end, running weakly and shrilly and with an absence of all human meaning into fam so, fu sui tu mu. The voice of no age or sex, the voice of an ancient spring spouting from the earth, which issued just opposite Regent's Park tube station from a tall, quivering shape, like a funnel, like a rusty pump, like a wind-beaten tree forever barren of leaves, which lets the wind run up and down its branches, singing, fa so, fu sui tu mu, and rocks and creaks and moans in the eternal breeze. Through all ages, when the pavement was grass, when it was swamp, through the age of tusk and mammoth, through the age of silent sunrise, the battered woman, for she wore a skirt, with her right hand exposed, her left clutching at her side, stood singing of love, love which has lasted 1,000,000 years. She sang, love which prevails, and millions of years ago her lover, who had been dead these centuries, had walked, she crooned, with her in May. But in the course of ages, long as summer days and flaming, she remembered, with nothing but red asters, he had gone. Death's enormous sickle had swept those tremendous hills, and when at last she laid her hoary and immensely aged head on the earth, now become a mere cinder of ice, she implored the gods to lay by her side a bunch of purple heather, there on her high burial place which the last rays of the last sun caressed, for then the pageant of the universe would be over. As the ancient song bubbled up opposite Regent's Park tube station, still the earth seemed green and flowery. Still, though it issued from so rude a mouth, a mere hole in the earth, muddy too, matted with root fibres and tangled grasses, still the old bubbling, burbling song, soaking through the knotted roots of infinite ages and skeletons and treasure, streamed away in rivulets over the pavement and all along the Marylebone Road and down towards Euston, fertilizing, leaving a damp stain. Still remembering how once in some primeval May she had walked with her lover, this rusty pump, this battered old woman with one hand exposed for coppers, the other clutching her side, would still be there in 10,000,000 years, remembering how once she had walked in May, where the sea flows now, with whom it did not matter. He was a man, oh yes, a man who had loved her. But the passage of ages had blurred the clarity of that ancient May day. The bright petalled flowers were hoar and silver frosted, and she no longer saw when she implored him, as she did now quite clearly, "Look in my eyes with thy sweet eyes intently." She no longer saw brown eyes, black whiskers, or sunburnt face, but only a looming shape, a shadow shape, to which, with the bird-like freshness of the very aged, she still twittered, "Give me your hand and let me press it gently." Peter Walsh couldn't help giving the poor creature a coin as he stepped into his taxi. And if someone should see, what matter they? And her fist clutched at her side, and she smiled, pocketing her shilling, and all peering inquisitive eyes seemed blotted out, and the passing generations, the pavement was crowded with bustling middle-class people, vanished, like leaves, to be trodden under, to be soaked and steeped and made mould of by that eternal spring. Fa so, fu sui tu mu. Poor old woman, said Risha Warren-Smith, waiting to cross. Oh, poor old wretch. Suppose it was a wet night. Suppose one's father or somebody who had known one in better days had happened to pass and saw one standing there in the gutter. And where did she sleep at night? Cheerfully, almost gaily, the invincible thread of sound wound up into the air like the smoke from a cottage chimney, winding up clean beech trees and issuing in a tuft of blue smoke among the topmost leaves. And if someone should see, what matter they? End of section 13. Read by Hannah Dormer, London, 2nd of May, 2021.